The nurse slid the birth certificate across the tray, her pen already uncapped. Houston Methodist smelled like disinfectant and formula, and the room buzzed with that quiet hum every hospital has. My wife Jessica was cradling our newborn, smiling like nothing could be wrong. Both our mothers hovered, waiting for me to sign. 6 years of marriage, a house in Beaumont, a life I thought was solid steel. I picked up the pen, stared at that line where my name was supposed to go, and set it back down. My voice was calm, but it cut like glass. Not until there's a DNA test. The air collapsed. Jessica's smile cracked. Maggie gasped, and even my own mother froze. No shouting, no scene, just silence thick enough to choke on. Because in that moment, I wasn't sure if I was a father, or just the guy chosen to pay for another man's child. Every eye in that delivery room locked on me like I had just detonated a bomb. Jessica froze, her smile collapsing into something brittle, her knuckles whitening around the baby. Maggie! My mother-in-law snapped upright, her mouth hanging open as if she couldn't believe what she'd heard. My own mother! Susan didn't move, just stared at me with that tight look mothers get when they know you've crossed a line you can't uncross. Even the nurse shifted uneasily, clutching the clipboard to her chest like a shield. The air conditioner hummed too loud, the fluorescent lights felt harsher than before, and the baby whimpered at the sudden tension pressing in from every corner. I didn't raise my voice, didn't slam my fist. I just stood there, steady, letting the silence grow heavier by the second. They were waiting for me to flinch, to take it back. But I wasn't going to. Not this time. My name is John Miller. I'm 38 years old, born and raised in Texas, and I work as an oil field supervisor out of Houston. The job isn't easy, long hours, rough crews, weeks offshore in the Gulf, but it pays solid, and it taught me one thing. You don't cut corners when lives depend on it. That mindset followed me home to Beaumont. We had the picture people like to brag about, a white-sided house with a 2-car driveway, a yard I mowed every Saturday, and neighbors who waved over the fence. Jessica and I had been married 6 years, building the life most folks call steady. I worked the rig, she handled the house, and when I was home, I tried to make every hour count. Sure, there were arguments, missed dinners, stretches of silence, but nothing that made me think the ground could break beneath us. I thought we were steel. Turns out we were glass. For 6 years, I believed our marriage was forged in steel. We'd bought that Beaumont house together, a modest 2-story with a white fence and a porch swing that creaked when the wind came off the Gulf. Inside the walls held our pictures, wedding smiles, road trips, birthdays, all the milestones that were supposed to prove we were unshakable. Jessica decorated the kitchen in warm tones. I built shelves in the garage, and together we planted azaleas out front. We weren't perfect, nobody is, but I thought our cracks were small enough to patch. When I left for weeks on the rigs, I trusted she'd hold things steady until I came home. Every man my age knows the grind, provide, protect, repeat. And every time I pulled into that driveway after a month away, seeing her wave from the porch, I told myself we were solid. 6 years of marriage, a house that felt strong. I didn't see the fractures running underneath. I still remember the night Jessica told me she was pregnant. I'd just come back from a 2-week hitch offshore, tired and smelling like diesel, when she handed me a little box wrapped in plain paper. Inside was a plastic stick with 2 pink lines. My chest tightened, then opened wide all at once. 6 years of marriage, and finally we were stepping into the chapter we'd talked about 100 times but never quite reached. I pulled her close, kissed her hair, and told her this was it, our golden moment. From then on, I started cutting back offshore, taking more shifts in the office so I could be home. I painted the spare room soft yellow, built a crib with my own hands, and told the guys at work I was finally building something bigger than an oil rig. For the first time in years, I thought everything had fallen perfectly into place. Those months felt golden, or at least I convinced myself they were. Jessica and I spent weekends in baby stores, testing strollers, arguing playfully about middle names. She'd flip through baby books while I stood on a ladder, rolling pale yellow paint across the nursery walls. Little fox and rabbit decals went up by the window, and I told myself this was the picture of happiness. For the first time in years, I was home for dinner most nights, setting my work phone on silent so I could watch her smile over takeout containers. She seemed lighter, almost glowing, and I wanted to believe it was the pregnancy filling her with joy. Looking back, it was a performance hers and maybe mine too. I clung to the idea that love plus hard work equaled a family. I ignored the unease in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. I thought we were building a future. Truth was, I was building a stage for betrayal. Back in that hospital room, the glow of the nursery felt like a cruel memory. The nurse walked in with a clipboard, a stack of papers clipped tight, and laid it on the rolling tray beside Jessica's bed. Houston Methodist had its routine fill in the highlighted boxes sign at the bottom, and a birth certificate would show up in the mail in a couple weeks. Easy. Ordinary. Jessica looked up at me, the baby swaddled in her arms, and gave me a tired smile. "Honey, why don't you take care of it? My hands are full." It was meant to sound casual, natural, the kind of request every new mother makes. But as I stared at that line where my name was supposed to go, something inside me locked. The fluorescent light flickered above the hum of the AC seemed louder, and my hand hovered over the pen. Everyone expected me to write my name. I wasn't about to. Not yet. I set the pen down, folded my arms, and spoke without raising my voice. "We'll wait for the DNA test." The words didn't explode, they cut clean and sharp. The room went dead quiet, like even the machines had stopped humming. Jessica blinked hard, her smile faltering, then twisting into something between confusion and rage. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, rocking the baby a little too tightly. Her mother Maggie gasped. "John, are you out of your mind? My own mother." Susan stayed silent, her eyes locked on me like she knew I wasn't bluffing. Jessica's voice climbed. "How dare you accuse me, right here after everything?" Her laugh came thin, brittle. "This is some kind of sick joke, isn't it? April Fool's?" But her hands kept fussing with the blanket, her eyes refusing to meet mine. I leaned closer, steady. "I'm serious. We'll know the truth before I sign anything." And for the first time, she looked afraid. Maggie was the first to break the silence. Her voice sliced through the room, sharp and scolding the way a mother talks to a child caught misbehaving. "John Miller, have you lost your mind? You've been dreaming about this baby for months, and now you want to humiliate my daughter in front of her family, in front of your own mother." She took a step closer, her finger pointed at me like a weapon. Jessica clung tighter to the baby, her face burning, red tears pricking at the edges of her eyes. Susan stayed rooted in place, lips pressed thin, but I caught the flicker in her gaze. She wasn't shocked. She was calculating. I kept my tone even though every muscle in my body was tight. "I'm not humiliating anyone. I'm asking for the truth." Maggie shook her head, her voice rising. "This is madness. No decent husband would say such a thing." I met her glare without blinking. Then maybe a decent wife wouldn't give me reason to. I'd had enough of half-truths and blanket excuses. My voice dropped low steady, every syllable meant to cut. "Rick Coleman!" The name landed like a hammer in the middle of that hospital room. Jessica's head snapped up, eyes wide, color draining from her face. Maggie blinked in confusion. "Who?" she demanded, looking between us. I didn't hesitate. "Her boss. The man she spent far too many nights with while I was breaking my back in the Gulf." Jessica's lips parted, but no words came, just a stammer that died in her throat. Her hands trembled around the baby, pulling her closer like a shield. Maggie's gaze darted from me to her daughter, searching for denial, for comfort, for something that wasn't there. "That's ridiculous," Jessica finally blurted, but the quiver in her voice gave her away. I leaned closer, locking eyes with her. "Say it again, Jess. Look me in the eye and tell me it's ridiculous." She couldn't, and that silence was louder than any confession. Jessica's head jerked from side to side, a frantic shake that didn't match the weak words spilling from her mouth. No, that's not true. I would never. Rick is just my boss." Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence, and she pulled the baby higher against her chest as if hiding behind the child would shield her from the truth. Her fingers fumbled with the blanket, tugging, smoothing, tugging again, every nervous tick on display. Maggie rushed to her side, clutching her shoulder, glaring at me as if I were the monster in the room. She said, "No, John, let it go." But her words only made Jessica tremble harder. She still wouldn't meet my eyes. I'd seen roughnecks on the rig lie their way through inspections, and they all had the same tell, the refusal to look straight ahead. Jessica kept staring at the floor, at the baby, at anywhere but me. And in that avoidance, I saw the truth louder than any denial she could offer. I straightened my back, fixing my eyes on Jessica. "You think this is just me spinning stories Karen Anderson knows? She told me everything." The name hit harder than my accusation. Jessica's face went still, lips parting, but no sound coming out. Maggie frowned, confused. "Karen, What does she have to do with this? I didn't let the pause breathe. Rick bragged to her Jess. He tried to drag her into his mess, too, thought he could prove he was trustworthy by telling her about you. Dates. Places. 6 months of nights you swore you were home. Jessica's eyes darted panic flashing before she forced a shaky laugh. Karen hates me. She's just trying to ruin us. I shook my head. She didn't come to me out of spite. She came because she was sick of hearing his conquests paraded around like trophies. And you were his headline. Maggie's mouth tightened, her grip on Jessica's shoulder loosening. For the first time, doubt crept into her eyes. Jessica's voice wavered, the words tumbling out too fast. Rick would never, he promised. The second the word left her mouth, her eyes went wide like she'd just realized she'd stepped off a cliff. Maggie's head snapped toward her. He promised what Jessica? The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. She fumbled, trying to recover. He promised me that work wouldn't interfere with home. That's all. But nobody in that room bought it. Not me, not Maggie, not even Susan, who finally took a slow step forward. Arms crossed, her gaze cutting through the lie. I leaned in, voice calm but sharp. Funny thing about promises, Jess. They only matter if there's something to keep secret. Jessica's fingers trembled against the baby's blanket, her face pale, her eyes darting anywhere but mine. For the first time, the mask slipped. She wasn't just nervous, she was exposed, and everyone in the room felt it. Up until that moment, my mother hadn't said a word. She stood near the corner, arms folded, jaw tight, watching everything like a judge, waiting for the right time to deliver a verdict. When Jessica stumbled over her excuse, Mom finally stepped forward. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut sharper than anything I'd said. Jessica, enough. Stop hiding behind blankets and half answers. Were you involved with him or not? The room froze again. Only this time, it wasn't me pressing the weight. It was her. Jessica's lips trembled, her eyes darting toward Maggie, then back to the floor. No, she whispered. We were just friends from work. Mom didn't blink. Friends don't need to promise each other secrets. Friends don't show up in rumors with 6 months of dates attached. She took another step closer, eyes locked on Jessica like a spotlight. Say it plain. Yes or no. Jessica's hand shook so badly the baby whimpered, and still she wouldn't look any of us in the eye. Her breathing turned shallow, eyes darting like a trapped animal. She tried to hold the lie a second longer, but the weight of silence crushed her. Finally, the words slipped out, thin and broken. It wasn't like that. It was only 6 months. The second she said it, her hands flew to her mouth, but it was too late. Maggie's face drained of color. My mother's lips pressed tighter, but her eyes blazed with confirmation. I leaned forward, my voice steady as steel. 6 months! While I was offshore, while I was breaking my back to put food on this table, you were giving your time, your body to Rick Coleman. Jessica shook her head wildly, tears streaking down her cheeks. It's over, John. It ended when I found out I was pregnant. I swear to you. The baby stirred, crying against her chest, but I couldn't hear it over the ringing in my ears. The words weren't just an admission. They were the sound of our marriage shattering. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. I'd already run the math in my head 100 times, and now I laid it out like a blueprint. July. First week I was still offshore, 300 miles out in the Gulf. I came home at the end of that hitch, and we made up for lost time. My voice caught on the memory, but I pushed through. I thought that's when the baby happened. I even bragged about it to the guys at work. But the weeks before that, I locked eyes with her. The nights I was gone. That's when you were with him. Jessica shook her head violently, tears spilling. No, never in the house, John. Never in our bed. Her words stumbled, tripping over their own confession. Maggie staggered back, whispering, "Oh my God." I leaned closer, my voice flat. So you were careful then. Careful enough to hide it from the neighbors. Not careful enough to keep me from raising another man's child. Jessica's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of her voice. We were careful, she whispered like those words could soften the betrayal. Maggie's head jerked toward her. Careful? What do you mean, careful? Jessica wiped at her face with the back of her hand, trembling. Never in the house. Never where anyone could see. We thought no one would ever know. The silence after that was deafening. Susan's eyes narrowed, her arms folded tight across her chest. You call that careful sneaking around with your boss while your husband works offshore? Jessica's face twisted desperate. I didn't mean for it to go so far. I didn't want to hurt you, John. My jaw clenched. Careful isn't meeting him behind closed doors. Careful isn't risking a marriage or a child's life. You weren't careful, Jess. You were reckless. And now the truth is staring us all in the face. She sobbed, rocking the baby, but no tears could wash that truth away. I took a slow breath, steadying my voice so there could be no mistake. If she's mine, I'll raise her. I'll be the best father I can be. But if she's not... I let the pause hang heavy, my eyes locked on Jessica. Then Rick Coleman can take responsibility for his own child. Jessica's face crumpled, her tears spilling faster as she shook her head. John, please don't say that. You've wanted this baby for months. You painted the nursery, you built the crib. You can't just walk away. My chest tightened, but I didn't flinch. I'm not walking away from a child, Jess. I'm walking away from a lie. There's a difference. Maggie gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. Susan stepped closer, her voice low, almost a whisper. He's right. Jessica rocked the baby harder, her sobs mixing with the newborn's cries. I didn't raise my hand, didn't offer comfort. My comfort ended the day her truth began. The cries in that room tangled together. Jessica's sobs, the baby's wails, Maggie's frantic shushing, but none of it moved me. I stood straighter, like I was bracing against a storm. My voice came out flat, stripped of anger, stripped of comfort. Maggie, you should take Jessica and the baby home. She'll need help settling in. Her eyes widened. What do you mean you're not coming? I didn't blink. Exactly what it sounds like. Until those DNA results come back, I'm not playing house. Jessica's head snapped up, her face wet, desperate. John, you can't leave us like this. I met her plea with silence, then turned toward the door. My boots echoed on the tile floor, each step pulling me farther from the woman I thought I knew. Behind me, Susan followed her hand, brushing my arm in quiet support. But when I pushed through those hospital doors, the Texas sun hit my face, and I knew nothing waiting for me on the other side would ever be the same. That night, my apartment felt more like a bunker than a home. The walls were bare, the fridge half empty, but it was mine, and unlike Jessica's smile, it didn't lie. I dropped my keys on the counter, sat at the kitchen table, and dialed my lawyer. He picked up on the second ring, his voice groggy but sharp. I told him everything, the affair, the suspicion, the DNA test already in motion. We talked assets, accounts, what divorce would look like if the baby wasn't mine, and what child support might cost if she was. I wasn't going to be blindsided again. When the call ended, I opened a notepad and drew 2 columns. She's mine. She's not. Under each, I wrote steps, deadlines, protections. Offshore taught me one rule, always plan for worst case. Tonight was no different. The marriage I thought was steel had shattered, but I still had choices. And I was damn sure I'd be ready for either truth. The phone buzzed just past midnight. I almost let it go to voicemail until I saw the name Paul Anderson, an old friend from Beaumont. His voice came low heavy, like a man carrying his own weight of betrayal. John, we need to talk. Not on the phone. In person. By the next evening, I was sitting across from him in the back corner of a sports bar off Highway 90, the kind of place where the jukebox never worked and the bartender knew when to leave you alone. The smell of fried wings and cheap beer clung to the air. Paul nursed a long neck, eyes hard, jaw tight. He didn't waste time with small talk. Karen told me what Coleman's been bragging about. She told me your name came up. I leaned back, the words hitting like a second punch. For a moment, the noise of the bar faded, just 2 men in a quiet corner, realizing we weren't fighting our battles alone anymore. Paul took a slow pull from his beer, then set the bottle down hard enough to rattle the ashtray between us. Karen didn't want to tell me at first, he said, his eyes fixed on the table, but Rick cornered her after a work event. Tried to sweet-talk her, told her she could trust him because he'd kept secrets before. Paul's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening against the glass. Then he started bragging. Names, stories, like it was some damn trophy case. And yours, John, Jessica's, came right out of his mouth. My stomach turned, but Paul wasn't finished. Karen shut him down, came home sick to her stomach, told me everything. She said he even laughed, said you were offshore so much it was easy. He finally looked up, his eyes hard. John, this isn't rumor. This is a man who doesn't know how to keep his mouth shut. And if he's talking this way to my wife, who else has he told? I leaned back in that booth, Paul's words still hanging in the air like smoke. The more I replayed them, the clearer it became. Rick Coleman wasn't just a man who slipped up once. He was a predator with a pattern. Offshore, I'd seen storms gather on the horizon, slow and steady, until the whole sky broke open. That's what this was. His arrogance was the lightning giving him away. He didn't hide it. He flaunted it. 6 months with Jessica, I muttered, and bragging about it to other women. That's not a mistake. That's a routine. Paul nodded grimly. Karen said he's been circling others too. He likes married women. Says it's safer, less strings attached. My stomach turned. I thought back to the long nights offshore, the times Jessica said she was with friends, the way she smiled too quick when I asked about work. It all lined up. Rick wasn't chasing love. He was collecting conquests, and Jessica was just one more notch on his belt. 2 nights later, Paul called again. We're not the only ones, he said. That's how I found myself in the same bar, same corner booth, but with a third chair filled James Carter, a Beaumont police officer I'd known in passing. He still had his uniform on, radio clipped to his shoulder, but his eyes were darker than I'd ever seen. He didn't bother with handshakes. Rick's name has been in my house too, he said flatly. My wife, Sarah, she started working late, guarding her phone, pulling away. I chalked it up to stress. Then I heard what he bragged to Karen, his jaw flexed, one hand tightening around his glass. Now I'm not chalking up anything. Hearing it from James changed the air in that booth. This wasn't gossip anymore. It was a cop, a husband, saying the same man had been circling his life like a vulture. And suddenly I knew Rick Coleman had left a trail a mile wide, and we were just starting to see it. By the end of that week, there were 4 of us. Paul called again, said another man needed to hear what we'd uncovered. Robert Hayes showed up last, a big-shouldered construction foreman with calloused hands and eyes that looked like they hadn't seen sleep in days. He didn't sit right away, just stood there scanning each of us before finally lowering himself into the chair. My wife Jessica's been working late nights. He started, voice rough. New clothes, new perfume. Phone always flipped face down. When Paul told me about Rick Coleman, something in my gut clicked. He slammed his fist against the table, the bottles rattling. If that son of a bitch has touched my family, I swear James cut him off calm but firm. That's what we're here to figure out. We need proof before anyone does something they can't take back. Robert's breathing slowed, but his eyes stayed hard. Just like that, our circle was complete. 4 men, 1 enemy, and a storm building we all felt coming. The 4 of us sat there in that smoke-stained booth, each man tossing his piece of the puzzle on the table. Paul repeated Karen's story how Rick bragged to her using other women's names as bargaining chips. James laid out his timeline with Sarah, new hours, secretive phone calls, the distance that crept into their marriage, right when Rick was around most. Robert admitted the perfume, the excuses, the late nights that didn't add up. Then it was my turn. I told him about the hospital, about refusing to sign the birth certificate, about Jessica's slip 6 months. Every detail lined up too neatly to be coincidence. As we talked, the picture sharpened. Rick wasn't careless. He was calculated. He picked wives whose husbands were distracted working shifts, traveling, serving. Men like us. He thought it made him untouchable. But sitting at that table, 4 betrayed men pooling their truths, I realized something. Rick Coleman wasn't untouchable anymore. He'd just put himself on our radar. Tension built in that booth until Robert finally growled, "Let's drag him out back and end this." His fist hit the table hard enough to rattle the glasses. James leaned in, his cop's voice cutting through the haze. "You put hands on him, you'll be the one in cuffs. And trust me, he's not worth prison time." Paul nodded, slow and deliberate. "We're not stupid. We can't afford reckless. But that doesn't mean he walks free." I sipped my beer, the taste flat and bitter. There are ways to make a man like Rick feel the walls closing in without breaking the law. We warn the husbands. We make sure his name spreads where it hurts most. And we watch every move he makes. The others sat back, the idea settling in. We weren't vigilantes. We were husbands, stripped bare, fighting smart. None of us wanted jail, but all of us wanted Rick Coleman to know his days of hiding were over. I leaned forward, both hands flat on the table, and let the words settle heavy. I've already started the clock. DNA results come back in 3 days. Until then, I'm not John the husband. I'm not John the father. I'm just the man who's waiting to know if his life is real or a lie. Paul's eyes flicked up steady. James gave a slow nod, understanding the weight of a countdown. Robert shifted in his chair, restless. 3 days, huh? That's nothing. I shook my head. It's everything. 3 days until I know whether I'm raising my own blood or paying for Rick Coleman's mistake. And when that paper hits my hands, no matter what it says, things will never go back. The jukebox in the corner changed tracks, some old country song bleeding through static. I sat back, the words echoing between us. 3 days. Then Rick's not just my problem, he's ours. In Beaumont, secrets don't stay buried. By the time I woke up the next morning, the whispers had already started. At the gas station, 2 men lowered their voices when I walked in. At the hardware store, the cashier gave me that look, half pity, half curiosity. Rick Coleman's name was slipping through this town like smoke under a door, curling into every conversation, every corner. Paul called me first. Karen told one friend. That friend told 2 more. It's moving fast. James confirmed it the same afternoon. Other officers at the station were already connecting dots, shaking their heads, wondering how long Rick had been prowling in plain sight. Even Robert said the guys on his construction crew were muttering about it over lunch. I didn't have to spread the story. The town was doing it for me. And as every whisper turned louder, one truth became clear. Rick Coleman wasn't the hunter anymore. He was the hunted. By the end of that week, the ripples had turned into waves. James called me from his patrol car, voice low but sharp. 2 more husbands put in for paternity tests, both of them tied back to Coleman. The words sank into me like lead. It wasn't just my marriage. My life cracked wide open. Rick had been spreading rot through the whole damn town. Paul confirmed the same thing from his end. Karen overheard 2 women whispering outside the grocery store, nervous about their husbands finding out. Robert, fists clenched, muttered, "He's blown holes in half of Beaumont, and nobody even saw it." The truth was worse than any one of us could handle alone. Each new test meant another family bracing for impact, another man staring at the ceiling at night, wondering if the child in his house was truly his. The pattern was undeniable now. Rick Coleman hadn't just betrayed wives, he'd poisoned the very foundation men like us built our lives on. 3 days later, it was there, a plain white envelope with my name on it, delivered by courier like it was just another piece of mail. But to me, it weighed more than steel. I held it in my hands, fingers tracing the seal, my chest tight enough to crack. For 72 hours, I'd told myself I was ready for either answer. I'd written out plans called my lawyer told the guys at the bar I wouldn't flinch. But standing in my apartment with that envelope, all that preparation felt thin. I poured a glass of whiskey, set it beside me, and stared at the paper like it might blink first. Part of me wanted to tear it open immediately. Part of me wanted to throw it into the fire and live with the lie. But offshore taught me one thing. You face the truth head on, no matter how hard. My hands shook as I broke the seal, knowing my entire life was about to change in a single line of ink. My eyes went straight to the only line that mattered. Probability of paternity, Yamzwo is 0%. I didn't read the rest. I didn't need to. My throat went dry, the room spinning, even though I hadn't touched the whiskey. 6 years of marriage. A nursery painted yellow, a crib I built with my own hands. All of it collapsed into those 2 numbers. 0. 0. My fist tightened around the paper until it crumpled, but no amount of pressure could crush the truth. I thought I'd shout, maybe smash a chair against the wall. Instead, I felt nothing, just a cold emptiness like the Gulf at midnight. Jessica's face flashed in my mind, her trembling hands, her forced smile in that delivery room, and for the first time I knew beyond doubt. I wasn't a father. I was a placeholder. I set the glass down untouched, folded the paper once, and whispered to myself, "She's not mine." And with that, any chance of saving us was gone forever. When I walked into the house, Jessica was on the couch, the baby in her arms, her face blotched red from crying. The moment she saw the envelope in my hand, fresh sobs broke loose. "John, please," she begged, her voice cracked and raw. "I'm sorry. I made mistakes. We can fix this. You love her. You love me." Her words tumbled over each other like they could build a bridge back to what we had. I didn't sit. I didn't reach for the baby. I just stood there, the paper dangling from my fingers. "It's done." I said, my tone flat. "The test says 0. She's not mine." Jessica wailed louder, rocking the baby as if her desperation could change the science. But nothing could. My chest felt hollow, not burning with anger, not shaking with grief, just empty. "You lied to me for 6 months," I continued. "You lied every day after, and now there's nothing left for me to believe in." Her tears filled the room. My silence ended it. Jessica's sobs filled the living room, but over them came a quieter sound, my mother's footsteps. Susan had followed me inside, her face pale, but her eyes unflinching. She looked at Jessica rocking the baby with trembling arms, then at me still holding the folded report. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of every disappointment a mother can hold. "There's no forgiveness for this." The words cut sharper than mine ever could. Jessica's head snapped up, eyes wide with shock. "Please, Mrs. Miller, I didn't mean—" Mom raised a hand, silencing her. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is burning dinner. This was choice after choice betrayal layered on betrayal. You don't come back from that." Jessica's mouth opened then closed again, her body curling tighter around the child. I glanced at my mother, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt steadied. She had said the truth aloud, clean and final, and there was no taking it back. The next morning, I sat across from my lawyer in his Houston office, the test results folded neatly on the desk between us. He slid the divorce papers forward, his pen waiting. I didn't hesitate. My signature flowed across each page with the same precision I used offshore when signing safety checks measured final, no second thoughts. Jessica's name was already there, scrawled in shaky ink. "What about the house?" my lawyer asked. I leaned back, staring at the skyline outside his window. "She can have it. The furniture, the photos, the backyard swing, every piece of it. I don't need a shrine to what never was." He nodded, making notes, then asked about accounts assets. "Split them clean. I'll start over." When the last page was signed, I set the pen down and felt nothing. No relief, no grief, just the calm of a man who'd chosen his line and walked it. The marriage was over. And unlike Jessica, I didn't need to pretend otherwise. By the end of the week, Rick Coleman's name was everywhere. At the diner on College Street, I heard two old men whispering about him over black coffee. At the church fish fry, women traded stories in hushed tones, their eyes darting to make sure their husbands weren't listening. Even at the job yard, roughnecks who barely cared about town gossip muttered his name like it was a curse. Nobody said it straight to my face, but I could feel it conversation stalling when I walked into a room, eyes following me, like I was carrying the evidence in my pocket. Paul called one night. "It's spreading faster than we thought. Folks are starting to piece together who else he's been with." James confirmed it the next morning. His sergeant had overheard Coleman's name during roll call, passed around like contraband. Rick thought he was untouchable, smooth-talking his way through offices and homes. But Beaumont is small, and in small towns, a reputation burns faster than gasoline. It didn't take long before the circle widened. James called me first, his voice low but steady. "Two more husbands got their results back. Same as yours, 0%. Both wives tied straight to Coleman." The words landed like another set of blows, not to me alone, but to the whole damn community. Paul met me at the bar later that night, shaking his head. "It's worse than we thought. Karen says women at her office are whispering, worried their names will be next." Robert leaned across the table, his face hard. That bastard didn't just break marriages. He built a system, one after another like he was hunting. The four of us sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of it pressing down. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was an epidemic spreading through Beaumont family by family. And the truth was undeniable now. Rick Coleman hadn't just stolen trust. He'd poisoned the well for half the town. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. A jogger in Rick Coleman's upscale subdivision found him half-conscious, on the sidewalk, wrists zip-tied behind his back, a bruise swelling along his jaw. Word traveled faster than fire in dry grass. By sundown, half of Beaumont was whispering the details, how someone rang his doorbell in the dark, how he swore he felt a jolt like a stun gun, how voices told him plain, "Stay away from another man's wife." The cops wrote it up as an assault with too many suspects, not enough leads. But everyone knew. Rick had carved a list of enemies longer than the interstate. Paul called me that night, his voice low, almost satisfied. Guess somebody decided talking wasn't enough. I poured a drink, listening to the silence on the other end of the line. I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. In Beaumont, that kind of debt doesn't get settled in court. It gets settled face to face. By the weekend, the story had grown legs. It wasn't just Rick got jumped anymore, it was how. At the barbershop, I overheard two men swapping the tale like it was gospel. They say a 3-pound sledgehammer was laid beside him like a calling card. At the refinery gate, another guy muttered, "Heard they aimed for his knee." Made sure he'd limp the rest of his life. Truth or rumor, it didn't matter. The hammer became the symbol whispered in low voices at church, over coffee, even in the break room. Rick Coleman wasn't just a man anymore, he was a cautionary tale, and every husband who heard it straightened a little taller. Every wife who heard it kept her eyes down longer. Paul called me half serious, half grim. If someone wanted to send a message, they picked the right tool. I didn't answer, but later, lying awake, I pictured that hammer in the dark, heavy and silent, telling a story without a single word. A week later, I came home to find a package propped against my apartment door. No label, no return address, just a cardboard box taped shut. Inside, wrapped in a rag, was a 3-pound sledgehammer. Its wooden handle was worn smooth, the steel head scuffed and darkened like it had seen work. I held it in both hands, the weight undeniable. I didn't need a note. The message was clear. Rick Coleman wasn't untouchable anymore, and somebody out there wanted me to know it. My chest tightened. Part of me wanted to drop it, call James, pretend I hadn't seen it. Another part of me felt something I hadn't in months control. For the first time since that delivery room, the balance had shifted. I carried the hammer inside, tucked it in the back of my closet, hidden behind an old duffel. I told myself it was just an object, just iron and wood. But deep down, I knew it had become something more, a symbol that the rules had changed. I hid the hammer in the back of my closet behind an old duffel bag and a stack of boots I hardly wore. Every time I slid the door shut, I told myself it was just a tool, nothing more than iron and wood. But I knew better. Offshore, we carried wrenches the size of crowbars gear that could make or break a man's shift. Still, none of it felt as heavy as that 3-pound sledge. I didn't touch it often, but knowing it was there gave me a strange sense of balance, like I'd finally taken back some piece of control Rick had stolen. Nights were the worst. Lying awake in my apartment, I'd catch myself staring at the closet, imagining the hammer glowing in the dark, daring me to use it. I never did. I didn't need to. Just its presence was enough, a quiet reminder that Rick Coleman wasn't the only one who could keep a secret buried in plain sight. Weeks passed, and the hammer never left that closet, but it never left my mind either. Some nights, I'd open the door just to look at it, my fingers brushing the worn wood handle, the cold steel head. It was heavy, but the weight didn't scare me. It tempted me. Holding it, I felt stronger, like I had the power to swing back at everything Jessica and Rick had taken. But deep down, I knew it was a lie. That hammer wasn't power. It was a crutch, a symbol I leaned on when the rage threatened to hollow me out. Offshore, I'd learned real strength came from discipline, keeping steady when everything around you wanted to break. Yet here I was measuring my worth by the hidden weapon in my closet. The truth gnawed at me every time I felt its weight. I wasn't reclaiming control. I was chained to it. And the longer I kept it, the heavier that chain grew. The divorce went through quicker than I expected. Papers signed, stamped, filed, 6 years, reduced to a stack of documents in a courthouse drawer. The Beaumont house sold to a young couple just starting out, the kind who looked at the porch swing like it was a promise instead of a relic. I handed over the keys without a second glance. Jessica packed what she wanted and moved back in with Maggie. I heard from my lawyer that she was trying to adjust, but I didn't ask how. I didn't care. I kept nothing from that house, not the photos, not the furniture, not the memories. All of it stayed behind like smoke after a fire. My mother Susan said I looked lighter, but I knew better. The weight hadn't lifted, it was just hiding in my closet on a wooden handle. Still with the papers signed and the door closed, one truth was clear: Jessica was no longer my wife. She was just another name in Rick Coleman's wreckage. Word about Rick spread faster than oil on water, and soon it wasn't just whispers, it was paperwork. Lawsuits started piling up one after another. Husbands filing paternity tests, wives demanding child support, even HR complaints surfacing from his own office. The man who strutted around Beaumont like a king was suddenly drowning in legal fees and medical bills. I heard he was limping through the courthouse halls, looking smaller each time someone spotted him. James told me a deputy had to escort him out once just to keep the crowd from spitting on him. Robert said the construction crews joked about him being the most expensive man in Texas, every woman he touched costing him another paycheck. I didn't celebrate, didn't toast his downfall. But I won't lie, I didn't shed a tear either. Rick Coleman built his empire on lies and broken homes. Now it was crumbling piece by piece. And for once, I didn't have to lift a finger to watch it fall. The Gulf was black that night, the kind of darkness that swallows everything. I was back offshore near Galveston, standing on the deck with the sea wind tearing at my jacket. In my duffel, buried beneath a stack of work shirts, I'd brought the hammer. I didn't plan it. It just came with me, like a habit I couldn't break. I pulled it out under the floodlights, the steel glinting dull and worn. In my hands, it felt heavier than it ever had, like every mile of betrayal was packed into that 3-pound head. I turned it over the handle, warm from my grip, and stared out at the endless water. Diesel fumes mixed with salt air, the steady thrum of the rig filling the silence. For months, that hammer had been my anchor, my false shield against the chaos Jessica and Rick left behind. Now standing above the waves, I wondered if it had been chaining me all along. I held that hammer one last time, its weight pressing into my palm like it was daring me to keep it. The gulf stretched out black and endless, the waves rolling like a heartbeat beneath the rig. For months, I'd carried that steel as proof, as if holding on meant I still had control. But standing there in the salt wind, I finally understood. It wasn't proof. It was an anchor dragging me down. I drew in a breath, swung my arm, and let it go. The hammer arced once under the floodlights before vanishing into the dark water with a dull splash. Small sound, big release. The chain I'd wrapped around myself cracked open. My chest loosened, my shoulders dropped. And for the first time in over a year, I exhaled without bitterness, burning my throat. I leaned on the rail, staring at the ripples until they faded. The hammer was gone. The weight was gone. And I was still standing. The next morning, nothing looked different. Same bunk, same rig, same Gulf wind, cutting sharp through the steel corridors. But when I poured my coffee in the galley, it tasted different. Not sweeter, not stronger, just lighter. For months, every sip had carried bitterness, like I was swallowing the weight of betrayal along with the caffeine. But now, after watching that hammer sink into the dark, the edge was gone. I sat at the long metal table staring out the porthole at the horizon. The sea was calm, steady, stretching farther than my anger ever could. A roughneck sat across from me, muttering about busted pumps, but his words drifted past. My thoughts weren't on the job, or on Rick, or on Jessica. For once, the silence in my head wasn't filled with their voices. It was just space. Empty, quiet, open space. And in that emptiness, I realized something simple. I was no longer carrying them with me into every day. That coffee was mine again. My life could be too. For over a year, Rick Coleman haunted every corner of my mind. His smirk in my imagination, his name dropped in whispers, his shadow lurking behind every doubt. Jessica was worse, her laugh echoing in the house I built, her face flashing in every quiet moment when I tried to rest. But after that night on the rig, something shifted. I woke, brewed my coffee, walked to work, and realized their weight wasn't riding my shoulders anymore. Rick's name didn't echo in my head. Jessica's face didn't follow me into the silence. They were still out there, living, stumbling, facing their own wreckage, but inside me, they were gone. Like ghosts, finally starved of the energy I'd been feeding them. For the first time in too long, my thoughts belonged to me. Not to betrayal, not to rage, not to memories I couldn't rewrite. I wasn't healed yet, but I was empty in a way that felt like freedom. It was a Saturday in late autumn when Paul invited me to a backyard barbecue in Katy. I almost said no. I'd gotten used to keeping my circle small, my evenings quiet, but something in his voice nudged me out the door. The yard smelled of mesquite smoke and burgers on the grill, kids running barefoot across the grass, while the men clustered near the cooler. That's when I noticed her. Lily. She wasn't loud, wasn't trying to draw eyes. Just standing by the picnic table, balancing a paper plate, listening more than talking. Something about her calm presence made the noise of the crowd fade. Paul introduced us casual as a nod. She asked about my work, and I gave her the short version: oil fields, rigs, too many nights offshore. She didn't flinch, didn't pry about Jessica. Instead, she told me about her job at the library, her stubborn old dog, and her love of quiet mornings with coffee. For the first time in years, I felt myself leaning forward, wanting more. Lily wasn't flashy, and that was exactly what drew me in. No heavy perfume, no loud laugh, meant to turn heads, just a steady calm, like she carried her own quiet weather wherever she went. When she spoke, it wasn't to impress, it was to connect. She told me about mornings spent with a cup of coffee, and a book about walking her dog through the park before the Texas heat got too high. I found myself listening in a way I hadn't listened to anyone in years. Around her, I didn't feel the urge to defend myself, to explain the scars Jessica and Rick left behind. Instead, I just breathed, watching Lily smile at the little things, the way the grill smoke curled, or how kids laughed, Chasing fireflies felt like stepping out of a storm into still air. For the first time since my world collapsed, I wasn't haunted. I was simply present, and her quiet steadiness was pulling me towards something I thought I'd lost peace. With Lily, time didn't feel rushed. We'd sit across from each other in a diner booth, coffee cooling between us, and let the conversation wander. Sometimes it drifted through simple things, her stubborn dog refusing to walk in the rain, my old truck coughing on cold mornings. Other times it slid into deeper waters, what trust costs, what it means to start over when the past still echoes. But the best part wasn't the words, it was the silences. Those stretches where we didn't need to fill the air, where just sitting there felt complete. With Jessica, silence had always been a warning, a space I scrambled to patch with questions or jokes. With Lily, silence felt safe, like a pause in a song you didn't want to end. The more time we spent together, the more I realized I wasn't scanning her eyes for lies or guarding my phone like a secret. I was simply there, and that was enough. Trust didn't come back all at once. It came in small steps, almost unnoticed. One evening, Lily reached for my phone to show me a photo of her dog, and without thinking, I handed it to her, unlocked. Months ago, that would have set off alarms in my chest. This time, it didn't. Another night, I gave her a spare key to my apartment, sliding it across the table like it was no big deal, though my hand trembled just a little. She didn't make a scene, just tucked it into her purse and smiled softly. When she stopped by after work, I didn't scramble to hide the past, the papers, the shadows. She saw the scars on the walls and didn't turn away. Each act was small, but together they built something bigger than I expected space to breathe. With Lily, I wasn't waiting for betrayal to come through the door. I was letting someone in, and for the first time in years, it felt right. One evening, we sat on Lily's porch swing, the air thick with the smell of cut grass and the hum of cicadas. She leaned back, eyes on the horizon, and spoke in a voice softer than usual. "I used to be married too," she said. I didn't move. Just let her words settle. It ended quiet. No screaming, no slammed doors. Just silence that stretched too far for too long. She paused, her hands folded in her lap. He stopped showing up, not physically, but here. She tapped her chest. And when I realized I was living with a ghost, I packed up and left. She gave a small, almost apologetic smile. People say scars fade, but sometimes they just sink deeper. I looked at her, really looked, and saw the strength beneath the gentleness. She wasn't unmarked. She was carrying her own wreckage, same as me. And in that moment, I understood. We weren't trying to fix each other. We were just choosing not to hide the damage. We were leaving the library one evening, the Texas air cooling as the sun slid down. Lily locked the door, and we walked side by side under the glow of a streetlight. I don't know what she saw in my face, maybe the weight I still carried, maybe the hesitation I thought I was hiding, but she stopped and turned to me. Her voice was calm, steady. "You don't have to tell me everything, John, but you can tell me anything." The words landed deeper than she knew. Jessica had demanded confessions, explanations, proof. With Lily, there was no demand, just permission. I stood there a moment, the silence stretching between us, and for the first time since the hospital, I felt safe enough to breathe the whole way in. I didn't spill my past right then. I just nodded, but something inside me shifted. She wasn't asking me to unload. She was telling me she could carry whatever I chose to share. Trust didn't come back overnight. It came like rebuilding a fence after a storm, post by post, nail by nail. With Lily, the repairs started small, letting her pick me up from work, handing her my phone to show a picture without the old instinct to guard the screen, letting her into my apartment closets, and all without worrying what shadows she might find. Each moment was another board set in place, another line of wire pulled tight. Offshore, I'd built miles of pipeline under pressure, knowing one weak weld could sink the whole operation. Trust felt the same, fragile, vital. And every time Lily showed up steady, every time she listened without judgment, the fence grew stronger. One evening, as we fixed her porch swing together, I caught myself thinking, this is what rebuilding feels like. Not flashy, not fast, just steady hands and quiet work. And for the first time since everything broke, I believed the fence could hold again. One quiet night, we sat on Lily's sofa, her dog curled at our feet, a movie playing low in the background. I wasn't even watching the screen. My mind felt clear in a way it hadn't for years. I turned to her, almost surprised at my own voice. "You know, I don't think about them much anymore." The words hung in the air, heavier than I expected. Lily didn't rush to fill the silence. She just gave me that soft smile of hers and said, "Good. That means you've got more room for what's next." Simple words, but they cut deeper than any lecture or advice I'd ever heard. I leaned back, letting the truth settle. She was right. The ghosts of Jessica and Rick weren't steering my life anymore. For the first time since that delivery room, the road ahead didn't look broken. It looked open. And sitting there beside Lily, I realized I actually wanted to see where it went. 3 years slipped by faster than I would have believed. I'm still in Texas, but my life doesn't look anything like it did the day I walked out of that hospital room. I moved into a modest condo in Houston, traded the endless offshore rotations for a steady supervisor role at headquarters. No more weeks on the rig, no more coming home to an empty house. Now my mornings start with coffee in my own kitchen, not a bunkroom galley, and I'm back in time for dinner most nights. The pay is steady, the hours sane. My coworkers joke that I finally came on shore for good. They don't know the full story, but they don't need to. I've built a rhythm commute work gym weekends with Lily. The chaos that once defined me has been replaced by something quieter, sturdier. 3 years ago, I thought I'd lost everything. Turns out I was just clearing the ground for something better to grow. Every morning now starts with 2 mugs on the counter, mine and Lily's. At first, it caught me off guard seeing her favorite chipped blue cup sitting beside my old black one. But somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling temporary. Her mug belongs there, same as her books, stacked on the end table, same as her laugh, echoing through the kitchen when the dog begs for scraps. I used to wake in an empty apartment, staring at walls that felt like a bunker. Now I wake to the smell of coffee brewing and the sound of someone humming softly down the hall. It's nothing dramatic, no fireworks, just the steady comfort of knowing I'm not carrying the mornings alone. I sip my coffee and glance at hers cooling beside me, and it hits me. This is what peace looks like. Not the absence of scars, but the presence of someone who doesn't mind them. 2 mugs side by side, a small thing. But to me, it means everything. There was a time when every thought I had started with them, Jessica's lies, Brad's smirk, the weight of a truth I never asked for. I wore betrayal like a name tag, letting it define me in every room I walked into. But 3 years later, I don't measure myself by what they did. Their choices broke a marriage, shattered a life I thought was steel, but they don't get to write the headline anymore. I do. When people meet me now, they don't see a man who lost everything. They see a supervisor who shows up on time, a neighbor who grills on Saturdays, a man who keeps his word. Most importantly, Lily sees me not the scars, not the anger, just me. I'm not pretending the past never happened. I'm just refusing to live inside it. Betrayal will always be part of my story, but it's not my identity. I'm not the man who was broken. I'm the man who rebuilt. One evening, Lily and I walked through the farmer's market, her hand tucked in mine. The smell of fresh bread and roasted coffee drifting through the warm Houston air. For a moment, I caught the sound of a baby crying somewhere in the crowd. Months ago, that sound would have ripped me open, dragged me straight back to that hospital room. But now it passed over me like wind, just another sound in the world. I squeezed Lily's hand and she looked up, her eyes steady, her smile soft. That's when I understood. My story wasn't about what Jessica destroyed or what Brad poisoned. It wasn't about a hammer hidden in a closet or whispers that shook a town. It was about this choosing to keep walking forward even with scars. I'm not the man who lost everything. I'm the man who chose to rebuild. And healing, that's what I have. Not revenge, not rage, healing. And for me, that's enough.